Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Anmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavams Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Bitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Dapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Rindaban Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, we're beginning a new chapter, and the chapter is called Purushottam Yoga, or the Yoga of the Supreme Person, which I find to be one of the more mysterious names for chapters in Bhagavad-gita. Some Bhagavad-gita chapters are really mysterious sounding in their names, and this one is one. What can it possibly mean? The Yoga of the Supreme Person. Anybody have any guesses? What does it mean, the Yoga of the Supreme Person? Yeah.
Well, the Supreme Person is Krishna, right?
Yeah.
And the yoga would be basically the discipline of Krishna, of attaining,
Yeah, that's one of the meanings. I kind of come up with about 3 or 4 meanings for what this chapter title might be saying. One of them is that since Krishna recommends Bhakti Yoga, this is the yoga that he recommends, or in other words, reading chapter 15, we're learning what kind of yoga Krishna really recommends. So it's the yoga he recommends. Another is that it's the yoga that reveals Krishna. So we might, by doing Bhakti Yoga, begin to understand who Krishna is. So it's the yoga that reveals Krishna. And also we could take the name to mean that those people who are advanced or supreme persons, that's the yoga that they do, is Bhakti Yoga. And of course, by doing it for them, Krishna is revealed. So these are a number of ideas that I think kind of help to get a sense of what this chapter actually is about. And we find that this chapter really deals with the idea of the banyan tree an idea of reincarnation, and the 3-item special knowledge. So these are the things that are part of this chapter. So let's read the verse together responsibly. If you have a book or a gizmotron, and tune it in to chapter 15, verse 2. Adhaschordvam prashritastasya sakam guna pravridha vishaya pravala andasta mulyani anusan adhascha mulyani anusan tatani karmanu bandini manushyaloke. So I'll try it again, and when I get it kind of down, then we can work it together. Adhaschordvam prashritastasya sakha guna pravridha vishaya pravala adhascha mulyani anusantat adhascha mulyani anusantatani karmanu bandini manusyaloke. So we'll do it line by line. Andhaschordvam prashritastasya sakha adhaschordvam prashritastasya sakha guna pravridha vishaya pravala guna pravridha vishaya pravala adhascha mulyani anushantatani adhascha mulyani anusantatani karmanu bandini manushyaloke karmanu bandini manusyaloke adhaschordvam prashritastasya sakha guna pravridha vishaya pravala adhascha mulyani anushantatani karmanu bandini manushyaloke adhaschordvam prashritastasya sakha guna pravridha vishaya pravala adhascha mulyani anusantatani karmanu bandini manusyaloke
Andhaschordvam prashritastasya shakha
adhaschordvam prashritastasya shakha
guna pravridha vishaya pravala
guna pravridha vishaya pravala
adhascha mulyani anushantatani
adhascha mulyani anushantatani
karmanu bandini manusyaloke
karmanu bandini manusyaloke
adhaschordvam prashritasya sakha
adhaschordvam prashritastasya sakha
guna pravidha vishaya pravala
guna pravridha vishaya pravala
Adascha mulani anusantatani.
Adhascha mulani anushantatani.
Kamanubandini manusya loke.
Karmanubandini manusyaloke.
Adas kordas prashadat dasya sasaka.
Adhaschordham prashritas tasya sakha.
Guna pravriddha visaya pravala.
Guna pravriddha vishaya pravala. Adhascha mulani anusantatani. Karmanubandini manusyaloke. Anyone else willing to give it a whirl? Ladies, anyone?
Adaskurtsvam prastatasya shaka.
Adhaschordham prashtasya sakha.
Guna pravrinda vishaya pravalaha.
Guna pravriddha vishaya pravala.
Adhascha mulani anusantatani.
Adhascha mulani anusantatani.
Karmanu bandini manusya loke.
Karmanubandini manusyaloke. Adha, downward. Cha, and. Urdvam, upward. Prashritaha, extended. Tasya, its. Shaka, branches. Guna, by the modes of material nature. Pravriddha, developed. Vishaya, sense objects. Pravala, twigs. Adha, cha, and. Mulani, roots. Anusantatani, extended. Karma, to work. Anubandhini, bound. Manusyaloke, in the world of human society. Now here's the translation of the verse. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruit of actions of human society. So I'll reread, I say, and you will please repeat. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. The tree also has roots going down. And these are bound to the fruit of actions of human society. So, the description of the banyan tree is further explained here. Its branches are spread in all directions. In the lower parts, there are variegated manifestations of living entities, human beings, animals, horses, cows, dogs, cats, etc. These are situated on the lower parts of the branches, whereas in the upper parts, the higher forms of living entities, the demigods, the Gandharvas, and many other higher species of life. As a tree is nourished by water, so this tree is nourished by the three modes of material nature. Sometimes we find that a tract of land is barren for want of sufficient water, and sometimes a tract is very green. Similarly, where particular modes of material nature are proportionally greater in quantity, the different species of life are manifested accordingly. The twigs of the tree are considered to be the sense objects. By development of the different modes of material nature, we develop different senses, and by the senses, we enjoy different varieties of sense objects. The tips of the branches are the senses, and the ears, nose, eyes, etc., which are attached to enjoyment of the different sense objects. The twigs are sound, form, touch, and so on, the sense objects. The subsidiary roots are attachments and aversions, which are byproducts of different varieties of suffering and sense enjoyment. The tendencies toward piety and impiety are considered to develop from these secondary roots, which spread in all directions. The real root is from Brahmaloka, and the other roots are in the human planetary systems. After one enjoys the result of virtuous activities in the upper planetary systems, he comes down to this earth and renews his karma, or fruitive activities for promotion. This planet of human beings is considered the field of activities. So again, the verse. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. So this verse is the second verse. We're kicking off this chapter, the Yoga of the Supreme Person, by talking about the banyan tree. So the first 5 verses of this chapter are more or less about renunciation. Then from 6 to 11 we hear about reincarnation, how it works, at least an overview. And from 12 to, I've forgotten where it goes from there. But at any rate, the overall chapter basically makes this point of the banyan tree, and it makes the point of reincarnation. And it also helps us to understand about the infallible, the fallible, and the Supreme Person. So these are some of the main points made by this chapter. But right now we're going to stick with the very first part, which is the banyan tree analogy. And the banyan tree analogy is very important, because if we can grasp this idea of the banyan tree, we can kind of understand what this material world is, how it's designed to work. It's a mysterious place. Anyone who really looks at the world begins to recognize that it's shrouded in mystery at every direction. Of course, I think in our modern day, we are puffed up in our imagination that we understand a lot of things about the material world. And certainly in one sense we do understand a lot of things about the material world. But for everything we understand, on the edges, in the middle, throughout, behind, there are things we don't understand about it. So although we know some things, it's like a forest full of wild animals, and there's a main road that goes through the middle of it. So as long as we stick to the main road, we're kind of all right. But the minute we get off the main road a little bit, we start getting into strange territory. And so that's the nature of this world. And this particular analogy asks us to imagine an upside-down tree. Now, where do we see an upside-down tree? There are a couple places I can think of. One of them is mentioned here in Bhagavad-gita for anyone who read ahead. So, where do we see an upside-down tree?
Reflection.
I thought you said something. Reflection, right. There's, of course, another place, especially in our modern day, where we see upside-down trees, and probably nobody will think of it except for weird people like me. And that other place we see upside-down trees are in computers, because in the file system, it always starts at the root, and the root's at the top. And then as you open the files, it branches out, and you go down. And so there's another upside-down tree. And so if there's an upside-down tree, where is the right side up tree? And of course, in this analogy of the banyan tree, the upside-down tree is the spiritual world. where everything is going on. And the right side up tree is the spiritual world. The upside down tree is the material world where we are now. And if anyone's ever seen a banyan tree, they are different than other trees. Banyan trees put out limbs just like any other tree does. But from the limbs, little things start coming down from the limbs, unlike other trees, and they finally touch the ground. And when they touch the ground, they take root, and then they become essentially another tree, but it's connected to the first tree. So these banyan trees kind of bud out. And when you see a banyan tree forest, it's basically just instead of reproducing by throwing seeds out, maybe it does that too, but it also reproduces by just extending branches, and little fronds come down from the branches, and they touch the ground, and they actually take root and become essentially another tree trunk. And so a banyan forest is very complicated and interwoven, and therefore is very mysterious. And similarly, this world is like that. It's very complicated and interwoven. And in this particular analogy, we have that the twigs are the objects of the senses, and the fruits are the various goals of Vedic explanation, which are Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. And we have branches going upwards and branches going downward. So the branches going upward lead to the heavenly planets, and they are done by acting according to Vedic injunction, which is pious activity. And there are branches going downward into lower species of life. So at the top of the tree, which is the root, normally the top of the tree is the top of the tree, but in this case with an upside down tree, the top of the tree, the root is in Brahmaloka, which is the planet of Brahma, and things go downward from there. So as there is a reflected tree and a real tree, the reflection and the real thing, they have many things in common. But of course, because it's a reflection, there are some extreme differences between the two things. So what is the difference in the real world between a real thing and its reflection? What's the difference between it? There's several differences, but maybe we can think about what are some of the differences that are. If you see something or you see something's reflection, what are the differences between those two things? You have an idea?
Yes, you'd say that's like the real thing is touchable, and it's touchable. Physically. You can touch physically.
Right.
And the other one is not touchable. You cannot touch it.
Right.
Anyway, you can see it.
Right. That's one of the main differences between a reflection and the real thing.
The reflection depends on the real thing.
Right. If there was no real thing, there would be no reflection. What else is different between?
Sometimes the reflection is temporary.
And it's based on the way the light is and a bunch of other things. I think Michael had his hand.
Reflection is reversed.
Yeah, it's reversed, right. Reflection is reversed. What else?
Also, reflection is distorted.
Yeah, it can be distorted as well. So that's the world we live in. We live in the reflected world. We live in the distorted world. We live in the temporary world. We live in the world you cannot touch. There's a world where things are not distorted, not reflected. You can touch them, and they're eternal. That's not this world. If you were here, you got off at the wrong exit. You should have gotten off at a different exit in the spiritual world. Gotta fix your GPS. So anyway, the whole process of Krishna consciousness is about fixing your GPS and getting back to the other world. So sometimes, and I hear it all the time on the internet and in other conversations where people are discussing the so-called evolution of the material world, they talk about where did the human language come from? Where did we get our ideas about truth and beauty? Where did we get our ideas about what is attractive and what is repulsive? Of course, to some extent, these things do vary from place to place in the world, but surprisingly, there's a lot of common, attitudes towards these things all over the world. Where do these things come from? And of course, they are not evolved and created bit by bit or puzzled over for centuries and finally discovered. They come because this world is patterned on another world. We talk because in the spiritual world people talk. So we come out of the womb already having a sense of language. And of course, right now, neurologists and linguists and people of that category, particularly people who study the mind, how it works, are very interested in understanding about language, because by understanding language, one understands a lot about how the mind works. But of course, they have no real theory of how people get language. In a short time, a baby goes from hearing random sounds to being able to produce the beginnings of language in a very short time. And in 12 years, the baby essentially becomes competent in one particular language, or in a bilingual or trilingual household, the baby may even learn 2 or 3 languages, because the child picks out these sounds, knows which ones are important, knows what concepts go with them. And without going to school to learn, we don't go to school to learn how to talk. We go to school to learn how to write, but we don't go to school to learn how to talk. We learn it automatically, and we don't have teachers. We pick it up without any kind of external structure. And more or less, after a certain amount of time, we become competent in a particular language. How does that all happen? It happens because the human consciousness already has a propensity for language, and all we're doing is learning a particular flavor of language. And so, at any rate, the point I'm making here is that the material world is patterned on the spiritual world. That if you watch a program on the TV or on the computer screen, we're seeing things and people interact. And the reason we're seeing them is somewhere in this gross material world, there are actors or people who are behind a camera and they're doing things. So we're seeing a 2-dimensional version of it, but somewhere there's a 3-dimensional version of it, and there's a camera focused on it. So if that 3-dimensional version didn't exist, the 2-dimensional version likely wouldn't exist either. Of course, these days we have computer graphics and things like that. But at any rate, the point here is that if we watch Donald Trump on TV, we know that somewhere, unfortunately, there is a real Donald Trump.
Unfortunately.
And so, and at any rate, the point is that when we are involved in seeing things on the television set, we know that somewhere there's likely a real life thing where we could go and see it ourselves, but not on the TV screen. And so this world is like a virtual world. And like the image, it is 2-dimensional. It appears real, but there's something funny about it, this material world. There's something funny about it. It's never exactly quite right, you know. I use the example often of when we want to eat something. If we're really hungry, and you know, Atmanivedana will say, okay, now we've got prasadam. But imagine, we're not going to do this, by the way, so don't get scared and run away. That when we distribute the food, he passed out pictures of plates of food and gave you each a photograph of a plate of food. Now, one way, you could say, well, I got some food, but there's something wrong with it. And the thing that's wrong with it is you can't eat it. So in the same way, this material world appears to be people. It appears to have emotions. It appears to have relationships. It appears to have situations. Never really find any satisfaction in any of it, because actually it's a two-dimensional world. But we can understand the actual original world that everything comes from, and that is learning how to cut down the banyan tree of illusion that we will learn about in these next few verses. This banyan tree is big, it's intertwined and entangled, it's mysterious, it goes for long distances, so it's vast, we can never get to the end of it. And we can wander around in it forever. So by performing sinful activities, we wander down the banyan tree to what's the top of the inverted tree, which is where the lower species of life are, where through sinful activities we can become a bird, a bug, a blade of grass, or a worm and stool even. That sounds really interesting. We should check that one out. So we can become these things by acting wrongly in the material world. However, by acting positively, we can go upward toward the heavenly worlds, but better is to re-enter the world from which we come. So sometimes the material world is just, I can think of it as kind of an hourglass. You have a big bottom and a big top, and they're kind of symmetrical. But in the middle there's a small constricted junction. And that small constricted junction is the Brahma-jyoti. So some people say it's all one. Some people say everything converges to a white energy. And in one sense it does. But that's just the focal point where everything reverses. So at the middle junction, everything is reduced to a simple one energy. But of course, nobody's attracted by a simple one energy. When we go through the Brahma-jyoti back up into the spiritual world, then there's a full world up there. In fact, that's the major world. In fact, that's the real world. In fact, that's the world that this world is a virtual copy of. So this is the copy, that's the real place. But because of our consciousness, we only see the copy and we don't see the original. We only see the copy and we don't see the original. And we knock around in this world, and we're allowed by the Supreme Lord to knock around in this world as long as we want. We don't have to leave here. If you like it, stay. And what you'll discover is life after life in various different bodies, sometimes in higher echelons of human society, and sometimes down and out, sometimes as an animal, sometimes maybe even as a demigod or a Gandharva or something like that. And we can go round and round and round and round and round until finally we discover that nothing here is of any value. But one thing we do realize is that there are many ways to look at the world. It's very big, it's very confusing, and so we can wander around on this banyan tree year after year, and we can always discover new things. And we can discover new ways to look at things. And as we discover new ways to look at things, we might even come to the point of discovering not only something that's new for us, but even a new way of looking at things that's new for humans in general. And therefore, we become a celebrity because we discovered something new that even other humans haven't come across at some point. But nevertheless, we're still in the banyan tree. So there's only one way to get out of the banyan tree, and that's through devotional service, because we connect directly with the Supreme Lord. And to connect directly with the Supreme Lord, we can re-enter the spiritual world where everybody serves the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, we wouldn't want to go there. We would be happier here. But of course, we are not really happy here, even when we think we are. All right, so I'm going to put a bookmark there. Any questions about what we just discussed? Yeah, second.
I've read in Nectar Devotion and Srimad Bhagavatam that the banyan tree is actually worshipable in Vedic culture. Can you give some explanation?
Yeah. In general, the banyan tree is worshipable. This, of course, the analogy of the banyan tree is an analogy for the illusory aspect of the material world. But in general, banyan trees are worshipable, and I'm kind of hard put to exactly explain why at this moment. But usually Ashavata, I think that's the Sanskrit word for the banyan tree, is considered a sacred, Ashvatam, banyan tree, right? So generally, it's considered an auspicious tree. They're trees which are auspicious because they do things for the benefit of human beings. And there are trees which are neutral, and then there are trees which are inauspicious. But at any rate, that's as much as I can say about it. Any other questions about this overall concept of the banyan tree? Yeah.
Just comment. I find it very difficult to understand banyan tree description in
Right.
yeah, very difficult to kind of connect everything with with what's going on in the world. I don't know how to make it easier.
Uh-huh.
Is there any? I mean, is it okay? Everyone feels the same way. That it's kind of difficult to grasp the idea of banyan tree somehow.
Well, whoever we are in the material world, we are trying to simplify the world around us in a way that we can wrestle with it, you know. The world is messy, it's complicated, it goes on, it's constantly changing. Nobody can live with that, you know. So we try to find some angle of vision where we can simplify the material world in such a way that we can feel that although we're not dealing with every detail of it, we're dealing with the important things, and we kind of know where we're going, you know. So throughout history, there have been many philosophies. Throughout history, there have been many religions. And throughout history, there have been many thinkers of various kinds. And they all tried to extract from this strange and puzzling world what is essential about it and what you should know to be able to chart your course through it. And that generally is thought of as philosophy with a capital P, or religion with a capital R, what we can understand and how to make our way through it. But with Vedic knowledge, we actually have a very detailed and very plausible and a very self-consistent picture of this material world. And we learn that ultimately, when it all boils down, the most important thing is to recognize that the material world is confusing, and you can stay here if you want, which is the banyan tree. Or you can try to cut down the banyan tree, at least in your own consciousness, because the banyan tree is going to go on forever, you know, as far as the material world goes, because it'll always be there. But you can cut it down in your own consciousness and then leave it. So we are saying, or Krishna is saying here in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, that if you want to look at this messy, complicated, blown-out world with all of its mystery, this is one way to look at it that simplifies it to where you can know what to do. And what you're doing is you are getting your journey together to get out of the banyan tree by cutting down the banyan tree. So that's what the basis of this analogy is. Unfortunately, in Kali Yuga, we have many philosophies and many religious systems, but many of them do not give us a realistic understanding of what this world is. They talk about some other details, and as a result of some other way of looking at the world, we may actually understand some workings of the material world, but we won't understand those that will make any real difference in our lives. So we can look at the world and think of it, say, for instance, in a scientific way, that we learn how the atoms work, we learn about quarks and neutrons and leptons and all this kind of stuff. And we can learn that kind of stuff. And certainly by learning that kind of stuff, you can earn a gainly occupation. And you can apply it in many physical applications and make money from that. However, what you will not get is any understanding of why it's all here and where you're going, so it's missing that. And of course, many of the religions of the world will hear that one should love God and one should love one's neighbor as oneself. And we hear these things, and they're good, and that gives us a way of looking at the world, but we won't actually understand how we can go about, loving God or seeing our neighbor as ourselves. We won't know the technique for doing it. So the banyan tree is to help us to grasp our position in the material world and our relationship to the spiritual world and to the Supreme Lord. And once we grasp that, we can start to actually go in a particular direction. And someone else on another street corner may be speaking another, simplification of the world. But that simplification will not be as powerful as this one. It will not actually give you an understanding of who you are, what this world is, and where you should go. So maybe that helps. I don't know.
I think I have to just read carefully based on what we're
Right.
talking.
So there's a nice image. I don't know if it's in the modern Bhagavad-gitas or not, but there's a nice painting a devotee did where it shows a banyan tree and it shows this, river or body of water, which is actually the, Brahma Jyoti. And it shows Radha and Krishna standing on top. Then it shows an upside down tree with the roots up, and then it shows branches going down, branches coming up, and it shows demigods at the top, it shows a human being in the middle, and it shows bugs and alligators and things on the very bottom. And so we get an overall picture of how this looks. And we begin to realize that going up or down in the tree is all about karma. This is missing in modern society. We understand how to build a jumbo jet. We understand how to build an electronic amplification circuit. We understand how to build an X-ray device or how to move data around on the internet. We understand those things, but we have no conception of karma, which is obvious. And most people have a built-in karmic calculator. Almost all of us do. We calculate karma for others and for ourselves, but we never understand why we're doing it and on what basis we're doing it, And but when we come across Vedic knowledge, we begin to understand what really counts in the karmic calculator and what does not. And we understand there's something outside of karma, just going up and down in the tree. The real going up and down in the tree is we want to get out of the tree altogether, not just go into the higher planetary systems. We want to leave the tree altogether. So if you want to act against Vedic literatures, be my guest. The Supreme Lord has made the world in such a way that you can do that. But if you do, you're going to wind up in a lower species of life somewhere down the road. And if you want to act in very delicate and detailed harmony with the Vedic literatures, you can go up and you're going to wind up in the heavenly planets. But if you're really smart, you won't do either of those things, and you'll engage in devotional service, and you'll leave the material world and go to the spiritual world. Other questions? I think we had several, wasn't it?
I would like to say something about the tree and this analogy. I think the branches that we are taking in the tree are the attachments to the world, and if we start cutting those branches of the attachments to the world one by one, we will come into the branch, and then we can move upwards towards where the Lord Krishna is. That's what I think would mean.
Well, through
Leaving the world, as you are saying. So you are having a difficulty understanding the branches. The more attached we are, then the more it grows, and the more
you cannot imagine that.
Yeah. So that's what I think.
So that's what gets said in this chapter 5, that we cut through the tree with the weapon of detachment.
Yes.
So as we become detached from things in the material world, we find the banyan tree, we're looking at it from outside it. We're not looking at it from being in the middle of it and being confused by all of its limbs and branches and roots and false roots and all this kind of things, both going up and both going down. Other questions? Yeah.
Can New York City be a banyan tree?
I think it is. Every city in the material world is basically a banyan tree.
Quite
So,
complex.
yeah, it's a bewildering place. And the interesting thing about the material world is that whatever you want to see it as, I use this analogy too sometimes, to some extent it actually adopts that thing that you perceive. Like looking at clouds. We look at clouds and we may see faces or a bunny rabbit, or we may see a man pulling a cart, or Uncle Herman or something like that. We may be looking at clouds and we see these things. But actually, these images we see of clouds and these shapes we associate with the clouds are more in our mind than they are in the cloud. And similarly, we can look at the world and come up with any kind of image or impression we have of it, or simplification of it. We can come up with any one. But the material world is what it is, despite what we may think it is or what we may see it as. So when we see it the way it actually is, then we gradually start coming out of it. And this is what we're actually saying is the message of Bhagavad-gita, and for that matter, the message of the Vedic literatures, to see the world the way it actually is. There's many millions of ways to see it, but if we see it the way it actually is, then we can come out of the banyan tree, we can come out of the tunnels of the material world, and we can re-enter the spiritual world. Otherwise, we can see it in some other way, and to some extent we'll be correct, and to some extent we'll be missing some important information, and we will rotate or circle around in the banyan tree from one thing to another, never really coming out. Yeah.
What did you mean when you said that we calculate karma for ourselves and for others?
Well, I'll give you a real interesting and simple explanation. In the world of theater and in the world of, television production, people write fictional novels and presentations all the time about either comedy. Most of the time it's not comedy. People are really mostly inspired by various kinds of drama, So a person will write a fictitious group of characters. It may be in science fiction, it may be in sort of semi-historical settings or whatever it is. They'll write novels or screenplays, or they write any kind of plot line. It's well understood, and if you study the craft, you'll recognize that there's a karmic calculation going on. Generally, there is an antagonist and a protagonist. There's somebody doing the right thing, somebody doing the wrong thing. And throughout the drama, almost without fail, at the end of it, we expect that the person who's doing the wrong thing will become destroyed some kind of. We expect it. And similarly, the person who's doing the right thing, we expect them to come out on the upside. Now, there are exceptions to this, and generally they don't sell well. And people know this, you know, when they write a Hollywood movie or they write a Broadway play or they write any kind of fictional presentation of human beings interacting, they take this into consideration. So when you write a novel and the people who are doing good die in the end, that's called a downer novel. And generally, they don't do well. And there's a reason for it, you know, because, and for instance, also, the people who are greedy and doing things very selfishly, we all recognize it. And if they win at the end of the drama or the movie or the novel or whatever it is, we feel something's wrong with the movie or the drama or the novel. It's our karmic calculator. That the karmic calculator says this didn't add up. And generally, in the back of one's mind, one thinks, oh, this is not the end of it. This is we're waiting for the sequel, where the karma from the previous bad actors finally gets meted out to them. We're waiting for it. And we wait for it in our social circumstances, and we wait for it in literary and fictional realms. This is our karmic calculator working, you know. So, you know, it's just surprising that we can not talk about karma, or we can pretend it doesn't exist, but it's there, you know, and we're always calculating it. When somebody's being a real, hard person to deal with, we're always waiting for them to get their upcomings. You know, we may not be part of it, and hopefully we're not, but, we wait for them to get their karmic blowback for what they're doing. And this is because we have an inbuilt karmic calculator. But in the Vedic system, we learn how it really works, what karma really is, the exceptions to it, and what to do about our own karma, which is the most important thing. That's how I would explain the karmic calculator.
Are we, I don't know if, I'm sorry if it's a
No, go ahead.
So are we, I mean, is the soul, is it engraved in the soul? How does that calculator get set?
Well, it's just a part of our consciousness, without verbalizing it, without learning it in school, we all kind of know it, whether we're involved in Krishna consciousness or could care less about Krishna consciousness. We're all kind of aware that the material world kind of gives people the blowback for what they're doing. If they're very nasty to other people, we expect it. They're going to meet some kind of tragedy. If they're very good to people, then we expect them to do well. Of course, again, there are exceptions to that, but in general, we expect that. So it's just, it's part of our conscience, it's part of our very fiber of our being, and although we may not ever verbalize it, even in a society which doesn't take God very seriously, even in a society which doesn't take any particular spiritual path as being very important, the karmic calculator is still there. Nobody got rid of it. And it goes on. But here we're learning what that calculator really is, how it works, and how we should really use it. Yeah, you have a question behind it.
What would you say to people who say, like, God is cruel?
Right.
Or God doesn't care about us.
Right.
As if he's like a careless father who
Right.
abandons his children.
Right.
I hear that it's very common. I even heard Neil deGrasse Tyson
Right.
on a talk show saying he made that argument.
Right.
I think it's a very common belief that many people hold because they don't understand why things are the way they are.
And they use it as a obvious and simple argument that there is no God because things are that way. That either we have to accept that God is cruel and we really should be figuring out what kind of nuclear missile we need to send to get rid of him, or that we have to give up our faith in him. That's what we have to decide. So, but actually, those things are false. it is a world where people do get their karmic reactions. And those karmic reactions are not pretty, because as we cause suffering to others, that suffering cycles back to us. And when it does cycle back to us, we can think, I don't deserve this. Because karma, there's a time delay involved in it. So when we do something that causes others to suffer, that breaks the rules of how one should behave in the material world, no one is there to tell us you're breaking the rules. No one is there to tell us that you better be careful. So we go ahead and break the rules. And then somewhere later down the road, we start getting the pain and suffering. And then we're actually angry. We think that something's wrong, somebody did something wrong. Or it must be that we have no God. In fact, Sigmund Freud once summed it up beautifully. He said that life appears to be a tiny island of pain in a vast sea of indifference. So, not a very hopeful view, but that's the way people see it when they take God out of the picture. They can't imagine why God would do that. But of course, bear in mind that our suffering is actually temporary. And once the suffering is gone, you can't remember it. You can remember that you had it, but you can't re-experience it just by remembering it. So the bodies are certainly temporary. And so once we're out of this body, we no longer remember or identify with our sufferings. So no damage is possible that's lasting, because nothing can touch the soul. We discovered in chapter 2 that the body can certainly be destroyed, but the soul is not the body, and therefore is completely free from any kind of adversity. Yeah, you had a further thought, or you were going to ask another question.
Well, one answer that I know of to my question is that if there's like suffering, that we should treat it as a sort of way to advance spiritually.
Right.
Even if it's death,
Right.
we know that if we meet it with the right attitude, that it wasn't like a crime against us, that it was a good thing, that we'll actually benefit from it, even if it is completely impossible to overcome it in this life. So, like, no matter how bad it is, we can always use it to our benefit. And
that's exactly correct. There is a actual verse that discusses that whole thing. That what is that verse? Yeah, say what's the first word?
Tatenu kampam.
Tatenu kampam shushamikshananam shushamikshamanam bunjana eva makritam vipakam hridvag vapurbir vididan namaste jivete yo mukti parisataya pok. And that verse translates into English as, one who offers you, my dear Lord, obeisances and glorification with body, mind, and words, all the while tolerating the adversity due to their past ill behavior, such a person is a suitable candidate for liberation, because it is his rightful claim. That's what that verse is actually saying. So our suffering is handmade. Our suffering is self-made. Whenever the UPS package of adversity arrives on our doorstep, if we check the packing list, we'll see our signature on the shipping order. We asked for it. And of course, when we get it, wish that it would just go away. But as a person becomes more and more Krishna conscious, they disidentify with the body. And the more you disidentify with the body, you also disidentify with the pain and the fear and the ugliness of your own karmic reactions. And of course, generally, Krishna gives you a discounted version of your past sinful upcomings that were headed your way. So that's the benefit. But he doesn't completely get rid of it, because in the material world, nobody gets a break. You had something further?
Well, it this life is all like
Right.
infinity back.
Right.
Even everyone else's actions, since they say we're all connected,
Right.
it still works in a way that,
And of course,
even if you think you didn't do anything wrong, chances are there's still,
right.
well, we know there's still things
Right.
that affect it.
That if we're not keeping track, somebody is. You know, that the material world, in our modern way of looking at things, generally most of the Abrahamic religions have rejected the concept of reincarnation. And so doing, they have no explanation for why, for instance, for children, sometimes they suffer greatly and even die at an early age. And it's because of some karma in the past lifetime. But if you don't accept that, then it appears God is capricious and malevolent, and there's no way to really explain it. So everything that happens to us is due to our past, either this life or previous. Michael, you were going to say something?
So in considering karma then, should we then do nothing to help alleviate either physical or material suffering, or even better perhaps, make people suffer so that they can bring up their karma?
Yeah, you could try that approach, but there's certain problems to that. As a matter of fact, many times people in Western world and in Western religious and philosophical thinking patterns point the finger at India exactly for this reason, thinking that because in India they understand karma and they understand reincarnation, that the idea then is to, well, it's just their karma. But that's not the attitude of a devotee. A devotee is not just thinking that, oh, why should I help this person? It's just their karma, you know. But unfortunately, there are many Indians who really do think this way. So in one sense, the Western criticism of the Indian mentality is well taken, because many Indians really do think this way. Oh, it just is karma. Why should I help? You know, and this is wrong attitude, because devotee is para dukkha dukhi. Just a second.
Our suffering, their suffering is our suffering?
Yeah, we want to help others in suffering. How do we help? The best way is to give knowledge, because through knowledge, they're today suffering, but today they're building up future suffering that's even greater. You know, so if we can stop their future suffering, we've actually done them a real favor. Now, maybe they can't grasp it. So sometimes we do these kind of halfway measures where we help alleviate their suffering in the hopes that by associating with devotees, they'll come to understand why they're suffering to begin with. It isn't because there isn't enough food. It isn't because there's not enough shelter to go around. It's not because there isn't enough clothes to wear. All these things are artificial ways we suffer. And the reason we suffer is because karma has arranged our lives in such a way that these are the ways we pick up our, bad debts from past wrong activities. So we pick it up. And so this is why devotees are described as para dukkha dukhi. Of course, if you do something to cause harm to others and explain it away, as I was just giving them their karma, and that doesn't work, because you are getting karma when you give them karma, give them their karma. It is a fact that if you're able to harm somebody, it was their karma coming to them, it came through you. But you have now become part of your own karma, so now you have to pay your own debt to the system. So you can't just write it off that way. But that's a good point to bring up. I'm happy you did. Somebody else had a question. Was it you?
I have a question. You said that the soul is not affected by suffering.
That's right.
But past and present actions do have an impact on your karma and on how you feel. Isn't that part of what your soul is? In other words, the soul of one individual who acts in a very spiritual way and avoids creating bad karma cannot be the same as the soul, or is it the same as the soul of another individual who creates very bad karma. I mean, is that soul something totally separate, an entity from the way you feel? Because there is suffering that is not physical,
Right.
and that does affect your soul, how you feel. Like, for instance, a person who's in a spiritual crisis,
Right.
it would be in a type of suffering that is the suffering of the soul, like the dark night of the
Right. That's also a very good question, because in Vedic literatures, the soul is described as Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means eternal, Chit is knowledgeable, and Ananda means blissful. So whenever we're feeling anything other than that, it means we're not in contact with our soul. We're actually in contact with our false ego, our false conception of ourselves. So to the exact proportion that we are disidentified with the material conception, the false conception of ourselves, to that very same proportion, we are Sat Chit Ananda. We have no difficulty. In fact, someone who is so spiritually advanced may not even notice their own death. There's a story about Narada Muni where he describes that he left the world as lightning and illumination occurs simultaneously, as if he didn't even notice his own death, what to speak of other kinds. That's usually the most harrowing experience anyone can go through in life, and of course we will all face it at one moment or another. But that shows that one is very disidentified with the body. This is a very peculiar thing, that the banyan tree becomes transparent as you become more spiritually aware, not only from a logical or a philosophical way of looking at it, but with your own realization. You no longer react to things the same way you once did. And the things that would be a tragedy for someone are not particularly that difficult for you, because the reason we suffer is because precisely we identify with the body, and that's where pain is. If you identify with the body, you can be very prone to suffering. And if you identify with the body, you can be very prone to be fearful. If you identify with the body, you can be very prone to various negative emotions that are quite common. But if you disidentify with the body, it's a whole different world. So the spiritual world is Sat Chit Ananda. And since we're talking about reflections, by reflective, computation, we can recognize the material world is in Asat, Achit, and Nirananda. So it's the reverse. Asat means not eternal or temporary. Achit means there is not knowledge but ignorance. And Nirananda, we can probably figure out what that means. Nirananda means miserable. So the spiritual world is Sat Chit Ananda, eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And the material world is Asat, Achit, and Nirananda, or temporary, miserable, and ignorant. And so it's not a stretch to kind of recognize that principle at work in the world that we live in. So as we identify with spiritual activities and we make spiritual progress, we cease to see the world that way. We cease to experience the world that way. But it's a gradual process, because raising in consciousness doesn't come cheap. It requires daily activities for purification. When one does that, then we actually rise above this world that we live in. Although, as Jesus said, we're in the world but not of it. We are walking through the world, and what might be a tragedy for somebody would not be a tragedy for us. And what might be a fear-producing situation for somebody will not necessarily produce fear in us. And again, to the proportion that we are purified is the proportion to which we no longer fear and experience these things. So the more we experience fear, the more we experience, pain, the more we experience negative emotions. To that same degree, we are not yet Krishna conscious. Yeah. Sachi Govinda.
If, let's say, we're all devotees, so if we see people suffering, what is the Krishna consciousness helping? Like, for instance, like, every day I go to work and I always see bums asking for change.
Right.
They're always saying, give me money, give me food, give me coffee, give me even
Right.
a cigarette, you know. But is that the way to help them by giving them the cigarette?
Certainly not.
You're,
You can give them prasadam. Of course, they may not want it. That isn't your problem. You tried to help. You can give them knowledge if they'll listen, but most of the time they're really not interested. Most of the time they're really interested in getting some money so they can buy their next cigarettes or whatever it is. So that's why you're actually cooperating, spiral downward, So in general, one thing we can do that you can always do in any situation is pray for somebody and say, Krishna, please give this person some kind of mercy. Or you can tell them Hare Krishna. They might say Hare Krishna back to you. I've noticed that, especially when I walk around dressed like this, people just say Hare Krishna to me. All kinds of people, people I would least expect it from, Policemen say it, sometimes, bums on the street say it, sometimes people who are, doing whatever they're doing, they say it, and so just by that activity, we have helped them a little bit. So one of the things I like to stay kind of very focused on is the idea that we have a notion called para upakara, the highest welfare work. So you can give somebody a crust of bread or whatever it is, but clearly their trajectory going downward in the material world is not going to change much. So our efforts should never be, our energy should never be squandered in just stopgap help where we're giving them something to eat or whatever it is. Our real energy should be lifting those who are willing to step forward into spiritual world, into spiritual understanding. That's where our real energy should go. If we have some other energy, we can do that. And that's why many welfare organizations really have missed the boat. All they're doing is ministering to people's material needs when they have blown themselves out from their bad karma, which is not a bad thing, but it's not going to make any real difference in the long run. You are giving somebody just another chance to continue to go downward in the spiral. And that's why we should always focus on primarily the activity of spreading knowledge to those people who are interested in hearing it. Yeah, Michael.
But certainly the Catholic Church would not agree with that. I mean,
What's that?
The Catholic Church has long ministered to people's physical.
Right.
How to use that as a hook as you get them into the church to impart the knowledge that they have to give.
Well, they should do that.
Well, they do that.
Right,
yeah,
right.
I mean, with a little bit, with a fairly, they're pretty well spread throughout the world.
Right.
So,
no, but Mother Teresa was different. Like she tried to save the soul. Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She wasn't focused on the body.
Well, that's exactly the way we should always do things, that if we do welfare work, it should at the same time be welfare work that has a spiritual component.
Because the theory is that if the person hasn't eaten, how can you start educating?
Right.
Instructing when the basic needs are not being covered.
But one of the things that's quite obvious is that when doing welfare work, it's a huge endeavor, physically and from an economic point of view. So an organization can easily and quickly become completely focused on material welfare work, and by meeting the details and issues for material welfare work, one has no energy and no time and no place left for the real deal. So anyway, let's move along to another subject. One of the things I wanted to point out is that through karma, we've talked about this banyan tree. One of the ideas that's coming out of it, it's a sifting place, that people are where they are, undergoing what they're undergoing, because of karmic arrangement. We are in the country we are, we're in the body that we are, we're in the class we are, we're in the race we are. All these things are part of the overall karmic situation. And because of it, we have options and we don't have options. Nobody has perfect karma, and nobody has the lousiest karma in the universe. So we all have somewhere in the middle. And from a spiritual point of view, this idea of being in a good place karmically or in a bad place karmically has no meaning whatsoever. It certainly has meaning on the material level. If you want material happiness, where you are on the karmic Ferris wheel matters all the difference. It makes all the difference. On a spiritual level, where you are on the karmic Ferris wheel means nothing. It's all up to what you do to become spiritually advanced. And so this is why we have higher and lower planets, why we can go some places, and we can't go other places. And we see that there are places where the demigods reside. We can't go there. The demigods can go there. We can't. We don't have the right passport. Prabhupada always used that analogy, that you can't even get to the United States without going through, the passport agency. So what to speak of other planets? And the whole thing is arranged that according to the modes of nature, as Prabhupada mentioned in this verse, someplace the mode of passion is stronger, someplace the mode of goodness is stronger, some other place the mode of ignorance is stronger. And as a result, these three factors create very different environments. And as a result of karma, a person will be placed into one of these kinds of environments. And generally, in our modern way of thinking, what we always think about is how to get placed in a better karmic environment without having to do any work as far as changing our karma. And we certainly don't ever realize that it don't matter anyway. What does matter is becoming spiritually advanced. And then you do the real thing, which is getting out of this material world. It's kind of like if you were in a prison and you're in one block on the second floor of some cell block, and you actually look across and say, I'd like to be in that jail cell instead of this one, And it just means nothing. But nevertheless, that's where 90% or 95% of all human being energy goes, is switching jail cells, from one to another. But we need to get out of the jail. So any questions about that? About that little piece of it. So the material banyan tree sifts things according to our past karma. We're stuck there according to what we immediately did. It makes all the difference as far as material happiness goes, but it has no effect on spiritually advancing or not. In fact, sometimes we discover that those people on the lower ends of the karmic spectrum have a better chance of taking the spiritual life than people on the higher ends of the karmic spectrum. Okay, well, maybe take a couple of questions and we'll end. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Mary. I knew this woman that was in a Rati Yatra about 2 years ago. She wanted to learn more about devotional service and about, how to get out of this entanglement, which is the banyan tree. However, she was very angry because she told me, I happen to know her from another place, and she said she was ranting at me. She said, yes, but they're all talking about, and we are not this body, but I am in pain. How can they just say that I am not this body? I'm suffering right now because of I have this problem and I have this other problem.
Right.
And how can they just say that? And I knew she was very angry because I guess she was still suffering, even though she's not this body, but I'm in pain.
Right.
How can I not be affected by this body because I'm in so much pain? So what can you tell to someone like that?
Well, you can explain, first of all, the simple fact that if you want to stop being in pain, then start just understanding the bald fact that you're not the body is not going to do it. You know, we can understand that intellectually. What we have to do is experience it through realization. And the way you experience it through realization is to take up the process of spiritual life. Quickly, one can be lifted out of the physical difficulties of the body very quickly if one is serious about spiritual life. It may be, you know, short term, but I've experienced that before. That sometimes by just engaging in Krishna consciousness, some physical pain even kind of receded into the background, and then when I stopped doing it was spiritual, it was right back again. So this kind of thing is just there, you know. But just understanding the fact, you know, like that E equals MC squared, that you know, that you were not this body is not really going to make any real difference. What make a difference is behaving or acting like you're not the body, and then that gives you the real tangible experience of not being the body. Okay, so Atma's telling me we're getting late. Unless somebody has a real burning question, we'll
They could also talk during prasad.
okay, talk during prasad. Of course, try to eat and not talk at the same time, but I'm sure you all figure that out. Was that?
Very small.
Small, quick question, okay.
Is that, I mean, when you chanting, I have 2 kids at home. For everyone to know, I have 2 kids. I'm just wondering, if you always chant and they eat prasadam and all this, what their chances when they leave this body, where they gonna go, for example?
Well, I mean, the more you're engaged in Krishna consciousness, the more likely that at the end of life you are going to also be thinking about Krishna. And if you are, then you will either go back to Krishna's planet or the spiritual world right away, or more likely you will take birth in the material universe, again, one more time, where Krishna is directly enacting his pastimes in this material world, not in the spiritual world, in this material world. And there you will be trained up the last little bit, and then you'll go back to the spiritual world.
I was talking about my kids.
Was that?
CAT.
She wants to know what happens to her cat.
To her cat. Oh, I see. I couldn't hear what you were talking about. Cat. Well, if you feed the cat prasadam, at least there's a good chance the cat will come as a human being and get a chance to take part in devotional life. So you're very, as Prabhupada would put, very magnanimous to the cat by feeding it, and it gets the chance to hear the holy name and so on and so forth. So the cat will likely become human in the next lifetime and get a chance to. Okay, so we're going to end and I guess go into a kirtan.
Yes, Maharaj.